This week, we're looking at new approaches to modern art at the end of the 19th century. Art Nouveau, which means new art, by 1900 it was kind of outdated, and you see this move towards very different stylistic strategies. Rectilinear lines, symmetry, and abstraction are styles that we see graphic designers pursuing. However, some things remain the same. There's this same desire to collapse the hierarchies between fine arts, i.e. painting, sculpture, architecture, and crafts, which includes graphic design, among other things. There's also this belief that artists can create a utopian alternative to the industrial world. The major patrons that we'll be looking at this week are bourgeois industrialists, and we'll be looking first in this lecture at how this operates within a very elite, more bourgeois world in Vienna. In the next lecture I want you to listen to, we'll be looking at how it functions within big business, or emerging big business. Okay. So in Vienna, we have this movement that's called the Secession. It's established in 1897 by the artist Gustav Klimt, and it's a group of artists that are rejecting what they learned at the Viennese Academy of Fine Arts and the School of Applied Arts. Primarily in those schools, they learned these historical styles, and they're saying, no, we don't want that anymore. They're also interested in this concept that we'll be talking about this week, the Gesamtkunstwerk. It's an artwork that encompasses every type of aesthetic expression. So that would include painting, sculpture, costumes, music, poetry, everything happening all at once. And this should sound familiar because that's sort of what they wanted to happen in Paris too, with Art Nouveau, that this one universal design could encompass every part of art making. In Vienna, we'll be looking at the Secession building as an exhibition space. And we'll also be looking at the different posters that they make to advertise exhibitions in that space. So this is a view of Vienna looking down a street that's called the Ringstrasse because it goes in a ring around the old part of town. It used to be city walls, and in the middle of the 19th century, they tear down those walls, create this giant boulevard, and build all these massive public buildings along it. And what we're looking at here is the art museum. So these are the art museum, the natural history museum. This is Parliament. These buildings, though, you would be forgiven if you're like, why does that look like a Greek temple? The art museum and the natural history museum look like a mishmash of Baroque and Renaissance architecture. That's because they're deliberately evoking these historical styles. Inside the Art History Museum, Gustav Klimt is actually hired to decorate it. And if you look at this, it looks like a Renaissance building. And the paintings up here, which were made by Klimt, and in here, they all resemble Renaissance styles. And that is what he's trained in. This is the building where many of these artists were trained. It's the Academy of Fine Arts. Built in 1877, though, if you've taken Art 111, it looks a lot like the Medici Palace. Am I right? That's because they're doing everything in this historical style. Well, the artists of the Secession, led by Gustav Klimt, reject that entirely. They build themselves a new exhibition space called the Secession House in 1898. And what's kind of crazy and fun about this building is, do you see in the back corner here? That is the one corner of the Academy of Fine Arts. So they set up their new building like with their back, like as if they're deliberately snubbing the old Academy. So this building, 1898, designed by Josef Maria Olbrich. It is this wonderful mishmash of Art Nouveau and the new modern that we're going to be looking at in the early 20th century. It looks Art Nouveau in that it has all of these very organic shapes and lettering that looks like it's produced by hand. I'll show you some details shortly where you can see all of the leaves and the gold and the curvilinear lines through here. All of that should look Art Nouveau. And then this up here, this dome is all gold leaves. Again, this very organic appearance. And yet, it's very firmly geometric as well, right? These bare white walls, the repetition of rectangles and squares throughout. It's much more rigid than anything we saw in Art Nouveau. Here is a detail of one end in which you can see the decoration along here, the organic lines, but then set into a space with rigidly geometric walls. I like this view too because you can see it in comparison with the large apartment building over here, which was built during the Art Nouveau period, and it has those curvilinear qualities that we recognize as being Art Nouveau. The Secession house, sometimes it's called the Golden Cabbage, really sets itself up in opposition to that style. So very limited ornamentation, clean white surfaces. This is a poster that Gustav Klimt made to advertise the first exhibition at the Secession House. When you look at this, there are elements that are Art Nouveau. Again, we have some curvilinear flat patterning in here, outlining, the curves of her hair. All of this evokes both the ukiyo-e prints of Japan, but then also the type of ornamentation that was popular in the Art Nouveau period. And yet everything else about this is so much more 20th century. I love the way that this is all negative space right in here. If we compare it with the Chéret would never do that. He would never leave the middle of his space negative and empty. But Klimt does that. It sort of evokes the walls of the Secession house, right? The woman here, Athena, is nothing like the curving, dancing woman at the center of the Folie Bergère poster. And then up here, the depiction of Theseus slaying the Minotaur has none of the curving pastel colors that you see in the Chéret. However, if you look at the lettering, you can see in here there's elements of that hand-produced style that we would also recognize as being inspired by Chéret. Another important designer in the Secessionist movement is Koloman Moser. This is the cover he produced for the magazine that was published by the Secession movement. The magazine's called Ver Sacrum. And when you look at this, it looks so Art Nouveau, right? She looks like a muka woman. She's got flowers in her hair, everything's curving. You have this view of her from below, very hand-produced lettering here. All of this looks very Art Nouveau. 4 years later, this is the poster he produces. So this is advertising an exhibition at the Secession, and there are women here. These are 3 women, but they're formed entirely by circles and geometric forms. No curvilinears. Everything is all rigid. It's highly symmetrical. You can cut it down the center. The text is hand-produced but almost illegible. And then throughout he has these geometric blocks that shape the entire space. So the rectilinear lines, the geometries, the abstraction, that's so different from what we saw in Paris. This is another example of graphic design from the Viennese Secession. It's by Alfred Roller. And this gets to a point of being almost illegible. Like if you speak German, you can read what this says. It says the 16th Ausstellung, that's exhibition of the Vereinigung Bildkünstler, so the Union of Artists of Österreich, Austria. But if you don't basically already know what it says, it's pretty hard to read. However, there's a lot about this that's appealing. We have the use of negative space in here. We have these beautiful S's that curve down to link the title with the base. All of these choices gesture towards Art Nouveau, but are really pointing towards the next century. And then finally, I'd like to talk about the Viennese workshop, or the Wiener Werkstätte, which really epitomizes this idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk, or the total work of art. Josef Hofmann and Koloman Moser establish it, and it's a design firm, if you will. They will design your entire house, the architecture, the furniture, the clothes you wear, everything. And this the idea is that graphic design can encompass every part of our life. I love this quote from the manifesto. So long as our cities, our houses, our rooms, our furniture, our effects, our clothes, and our jewelry, so long as our language and feelings fail to reflect the spirit of our times in a plain, simple, and beautiful way, we shall be infinitely behind our ancestors. You can really hear the inspiration from William Morris there, right? He wanted beautiful products for the urban world. But what's different about the Viennese is that they want them to be modern. They don't want the historical styles that they learned about. They want everything to look like it's built for the modern world.